"I don't care about your supposed alibi, Mr. Diaz," Judge Sterling sneered, his voice dripping with venom as he leaned over the heavy mahogany bench. "People from your specific demographic come into my courtroom expecting sympathy, but all I see is a thug who thought he could steal a luxury vehicle and get away with it. I will bury you under the prison." The courtroom held its breath. The young black man looked up, his chains rattling. "I'm not asking for sympathy, Your Honor. I'm just asking if you've checked your son's cloud storage." The air inside courtroom 3B of the Fulton County Courthouse was thick, smelling faintly of lemon polish, old paper, and generations of despair. It was a cavernous room, designed to make anyone standing in the well feel infinitesimally small. For Brandon Diaz, an Afro-Latino 24-year-old who had never so much as received a parking ticket, the room felt like a tomb. He sat at the defense table, his wrists chafed by the heavy iron handcuffs resting on the scarred wood. He wore a borrowed gray suit that was a size too large, his posture rigid with a mixture of terror and disbelief. Beside him sat Destiny Allen, a powerhouse defense attorney whose reputation in Atlanta preceded her. Destiny was a force of nature, a woman who had clawed her way from the rougher edges of the city through Howard University and straight to the top of her class at Yale Law. She was known for her razor-sharp intellect and her absolute refusal to back down from intimidation. Today, she wore a tailored navy blue suit, her posture immaculate, her files perfectly organized, but even Destiny felt the suffocating weight of the room today, because presiding over them was the Honorable Arthur Sterling. Judge Sterling was a man cut from old Southern cloth, a relic of an era the city had desperately tried to leave behind. With his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his wire-rimmed glasses resting on the bridge of his aristocratic nose, and his black robes draped over his shoulders like a king's mantle, Sterling ruled his courtroom with an iron fist and a thinly veiled prejudice. For years, rumors had swirled around the Fulton County legal circuit about Sterling's disproportionately harsh sentencing of black and brown defendants. He was a man who believed in a strict hierarchy, and in his eyes, Brandon Diaz belonged at the very bottom. "Are we quite ready to proceed, Miss Allen?" Judge Sterling's voice echoed through the chamber, dripping with a condescension that made Destiny's jaw clench. "Or does the defense require more time to fabricate a plausible narrative for your client?" "Objection to the court's characterization, Your Honor," Destiny fired back instantly, standing up. "The defense is completely prepared. And we remind the court that my client is presumed innocent." "Sit down, counselor," Sterling snapped, his gavel striking the sounding block with a sharp crack. "Save your theatrical reminders for the jury. Though, looking at the evidence, I highly doubt a jury will be swayed by your usual theatrics." Brandon swallowed hard, looking down at his hands. He was accused of grand theft auto and armed robbery, specifically, the violent hijacking of a pristine, $150,000 Mercedes-Benz S-Class in the upscale neighborhood of Buckhead. The prosecution claimed Brandon had ambushed the driver at gunpoint, stripped him of his Rolex Daytona, and sped off into the night. The fact that the car was found abandoned 3 miles from Brandon's apartment complex was the only tangible link the police had, but in Judge Sterling's courtroom, that thin thread was being woven into a noose. "Your Honor," Destiny maintained her composure, though her eyes blazed. "The prosecution's evidence is entirely circumstantial. There is no DNA in the vehicle, the weapon has not been recovered, and the eyewitness identification was done in a highly irregular show-up procedure in the middle of the night, not a standard lineup." "Miss Allen," Sterling leaned forward, his eyes narrowing into cold, gray slits. He stared directly at Brandon, bypassing the attorney entirely. "I have seen 100 young men exactly like Mr. Diaz stand exactly where he is standing. They come from certain backgrounds. They look at the wealth of this great city, they feel entitled to it, and they take it with violence. I am not a fool, and I will not allow you to turn my courtroom into a circus to protect a violent street thug. Your Honor, I demand you strike that from the record." Destiny yelled, slamming her palm on the table. "You are demonstrating clear and unmitigated bias against my client based on his race. One more word, Miss Allen, and you will be joining your client in a holding cell for contempt," Sterling warned, his voice dangerously quiet. "The trial begins tomorrow morning. Have your client ready, and I strongly suggest you advise him to consider the state's plea deal. Because if he wastes my time and this court's resources, I will ensure he doesn't see the outside of the United States Penitentiary in Atlanta until his hair is as white as mine. Brandon felt a cold sweat break out across the back of his neck. He looked at Destiny, his dark eyes wide with panic. "Destiny," he whispered, his voice trembling. "He's going to convict me before the jury even hears a word." Destiny sat down slowly, her mind racing. She looked at the smirking prosecutor across the aisle, then up at the judge who was already reviewing his next docket file with casual indifference. "He thinks he is," Destiny whispered back, her voice tight with a fierce, protective resolve, "but he doesn't know what we have. Just hold on, Brandon. The trial is just beginning." The night of October 4th was supposed to be completely unremarkable for Brandon Diaz. He was working his second job as a late-night maintenance supervisor at the Georgia World Congress Center, a sprawling convention complex in downtown Atlanta. He took the job to pay for his mother's expensive dialysis treatments and to save up for night classes in architecture. He wasn't a gang member, he wasn't a thug. He was a young man exhausted by the relentless grind of poverty, trying desperately to build a legitimate life. According to the Fulton County Police Department, however, Brandon had somehow slipped away from his shift, traveled 5 miles north to Buckhead, hijacked a wealthy investment banker's Mercedes-Benz at gunpoint, and then returned to work as if nothing happened. It was an impossible timeline, a logistical nightmare that would require teleportation, but the lead detective on the case, Detective Miller, was notoriously corrupt and preferred quick closures over actual justice. Back in the defense's strategy room, Destiny paced the floor, her heels clicking rhythmically against the hardwood. Spread across the large oak conference table were hundreds of pages of discovery, crime scene photos, and witness statements. "The entire narrative is a fabrication," Destiny muttered to herself, drawing a red marker line across a timeline pinned to the whiteboard. The victim, a Mr. Charles Vance, claims the assailant was a black male, approximately 6 feet tall, wearing a dark hoodie. That describes roughly 40% of the male population in this city. He was heavily intoxicated. His blood alcohol level was 12 when the police finally took his statement. He couldn't even remember what color the gun was. Her paralegal, Marcus, looked up from his laptop. "And the car? The Mercedes?" "Found abandoned near Brandon's complex, wiped clean with bleach," Destiny replied, shaking her head. "No prints, no hair, nothing. But they found a dark hoodie in the dumpster behind Brandon's building. No DNA on it, but Miller logged it as the primary piece of physical evidence." Destiny sat heavily in her chair, rubbing her temples. She knew exactly what was happening. This was a classic framing. The police needed a suspect to appease the wealthy residents of Buckhead, and Brandon was a convenient, vulnerable target who lived nearby. But what troubled Destiny most was the judge. Why was Judge Sterling so deeply invested in this specific case? Generally, a judge of his tenure wouldn't micromanage a standard grand theft auto case unless it was high profile. Charles Vance was rich, yes, but not famous. "Marcus," Destiny said slowly, her eyes narrowing as a thought occurred to her, "pull up everything you can find on Judge Sterling's immediate family. I want financial records, property deeds, club memberships, everything. You think the judge is connected to the victim?" Marcus asked, his fingers already flying across the keyboard. "I think a judge with a history of railroading minorities is suddenly taking a very keen, very personal interest in ensuring my client goes to prison for a very long time," Destiny said. "Sterling practically threatened Brandon into taking a 20-year plea deal for a crime where nobody was physically harmed. That's a maximum sentence. He's trying to bury Brandon, and I need to know why." For the next 48 hours, Destiny and Marcus barely slept. They dug through public records, filed emergency subpoenas, and chased down digital footprints. The deeper they dug, the murkier the water became. They discovered that Judge Sterling was a prominent member of the Capital City Club, an exclusive, ultra-wealthy country club where Charles Vance was also a member, but that wasn't the smoking gun. Memberships overlap in elite circles. It wasn't until late Sunday night, just hours before the trial was set to resume, that Marcus hit the jackpot. "Destiny," Marcus said, his voice breathless as he stared at his screen. "You need to see this." Destiny rushed over. On the screen was an unsealed traffic citation from 3 years ago, buried deep in a suburban county database. "Sterling has a son," Marcus explained. "Trenton Sterling, 25 years old. He has a history of severe substance abuse. 3 DUIs, 2 of which miraculously resulted in no jail time and sealed records. And guess what Trenton's favorite hobby is when he's high on cocaine?" Destiny's eyes widened as she read the arrest report. "Joyriding. He steals luxury cars, goes on a bender, and dumps them." "Exactly," Marcus said. "And look at this police report from a neighboring county 2 years ago. Trenton Sterling was caught trying to pawn a stolen Rolex Daytona. The charges were quietly dropped after the victim received an anonymous, out-of-court settlement of $50,000. Destiny felt a cold chill run down her spine. The pieces were slamming together with sickening clarity. The victim in our case, Vance, was robbed of a Rolex Daytona and a Mercedes, and the car was found wiped clean. Brandon didn't steal that car. The judge's son did. And the judge is using his courtroom to pin his son's violent felony on a poor black kid to protect his family's legacy. Can we prove it?" Marcus asked, looking terrified. "Accusing a sitting superior court judge of orchestrating a frame-up. Destiny, that's career suicide. If you're wrong, you'll be disbarred. He might even have you arrested." Destiny grabbed her briefcase and began stuffing the documents inside, her hands shaking not from fear, but from a tidal wave of absolute fury. "I'm not wrong," she said coldly. "But to prove it, we need to spring a trap. And Brandon has to be the one to pull the trigger." Monday morning arrived with torrential rain, washing the streets of Atlanta in a gloomy, gray light that perfectly matched the mood inside the holding cells beneath the courthouse. Destiny sat across from Brandon in a small, concrete interview room. The only light came from a flickering fluorescent bulb overhead, casting long, nervous shadows across Brandon's face. Destiny laid out the entire theory. She showed him the arrest records of Trenton Sterling, the connections to the Capital City Club, the pattern of covered-up crimes. Brandon listened in stunned silence, his eyes darting between the papers and Destiny's face. "You're telling me," Brandon whispered, his voice cracking, "that the man in the black robe, the man who is supposed to be impartial, is the father of the guy who actually did this? And he's actively trying to send me to prison to cover for him?" "Yes," Destiny said firmly, holding his gaze. "Judge Sterling knows his son is a violent addict. If Trenton gets caught with armed robbery and grand theft auto, with his prior record, he goes to federal prison. Sterling's reputation is ruined, his legacy is destroyed, and his son's life is over. But you, Brandon? To a man like Sterling, you are disposable. You are the perfect fall guy." Tears welled in Brandon's eyes, a mixture of profound grief and boiling anger. "I take care of my mom, Destiny. I work 60 hours a week. I've never hurt anybody." And he just looked at me. He just looked at my skin and decided my life was worth throwing away in a dumpster? "That's exactly what he did," Destiny said, reaching across the metal table to grip his hand. "But we are not going to let him win. I need you to listen to me very carefully. We have motive, but we don't have hard proof. We don't have the dashcam footage from the Mercedes. The police claim the camera unit was ripped out and destroyed during the theft. If we just stand up and accuse the judge's son, Sterling will strike it from the record, hold me in contempt, and declare a mistrial. Then he'll ensure you get a worse judge next time, or he'll have you targeted in jail." Brandon pulled his hand back, panic setting in. "Then what do we do?" "I'm dead. I'm legally dead." "No, you're not," Destiny said, her eyes flashing with a dangerous intelligence. "The police said the camera was destroyed. But high-end vehicles like the S-Class don't just rely on local storage, they have a built-in cellular uplink. In the event of a high-impact crash or an unauthorized breach, the internal cabin camera uploads a backup directly to a secure Mercedes-Benz cloud server in Germany." Brandon blinked. "Did you get the footage?" Destiny smiled, a sharp, predatory grin. I subpoenaed the corporate office in Stuttgart under the guise of an intellectual property dispute regarding their security software. It bypassed the local authorities completely. I got the file at 3 a.m. this morning. She pulled out her tablet and pressed play. The video was dark at first, but the high-definition infrared sensors quickly adjusted. The camera, mounted near the rearview mirror, showed the interior of the stolen Mercedes. The driver was clearly visible, illuminated by the glow of the dashboard. It was a young white man with messy blonde hair, high on something, his eyes wide and frantic. On his right hand, gripping the steering wheel, was a heavy gold college signet ring, the exact same ring Judge Sterling wore on his own hand. It was Trenton Sterling. "Oh my God," Brandon breathed. "That's him. We have the weapon, Brandon. Now, we have to use it," Destiny said, turning off the tablet. "But we can't just submit it normally. Sterling will find a procedural loophole to block it. He'll claim it wasn't disclosed in discovery, or he'll claim it's a deepfake. We need him to back himself into a corner in front of the jury and the court reporter. We need him to be so arrogant, so confident in his racism and his power, that he exposes himself." "How?" "I'm going to put you on the stand," Destiny said. Brandon violently shook his head. "No. No way. Every lawyer says you never put the defendant on the stand. The prosecutor will rip me to shreds." "The prosecutor doesn't matter," Destiny urged, leaning in close. "This isn't about the prosecutor, this is about Judge Sterling. When you are on that stand, Sterling won't be able to help himself. His hatred for you, his need to dominate you and force you into submission, will override his judicial restraint. He will try to interrogate you himself. And when he does, when the entire courtroom is hanging on his every word, you are going to drop the bomb." Brandon looked down at his shackled wrists, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The risk was astronomical. If he stuttered, if he failed to deliver the line, he would be locked away for 20 years, his mother would die alone. His future would be erased. He looked up at Destiny. She wasn't just his lawyer anymore, she was a warrior handing him a sword. "Tell me exactly what to say," Brandon said, his voice hardening into steel. The courtroom was packed. Word had spread through the courthouse grapevine that Destiny Allen was preparing for a war, and law clerks, off-duty officers, and local journalists had crowded into the wooden pews of the gallery. Judge Sterling took the bench, looking down at the defense table with an expression of supreme boredom and disdain. He smoothed his black robes and adjusted his glasses. "Miss Allen, call your first witness." "The defense calls the defendant, Brandon Diaz, to the stand," Destiny announced clearly, her voice carrying to the very back of the room. A murmur rippled through the gallery. The prosecutor, a slick, overconfident man named Harland, shot up from his chair. "Objection, Your Honor. The defense gave no prior notice of this, and quite frankly, it's a desperate waste of the court's time." Overruled, Sterling sighed heavily, though his eyes gleamed with a cruel satisfaction. If Allen wishes to let her client hang himself on the stand, the court will not stand in her way. Proceed, Mr. Diaz. Remember, you are under oath. Brandon walked slowly from the defense table to the witness box. Every step felt like walking through deep mud. He raised his right hand, swore to tell the truth, and sat down. He looked at Destiny, who gave him a barely perceptible nod, and then he looked at Judge Sterling. The judge was staring at him like a bug pinned to a piece of cardboard. Destiny walked to the podium. "Mr. Diaz, for the record, where were you on the night of October 4th at 11:30 p.m.? "I was at work, ma'am," Brandon said, his voice steady, "at the Georgia World Congress Center. I was repairing a broken HVAC unit in Hall C. "And did you leave your workplace at any point that night?" "No, ma'am. My keycard logs show I never exited the building until my shift ended at 6 a.m. Destiny walked the jury through his timeline, presenting the keycard logs and the testimonies of his coworkers. It was a solid, impenetrable alibi. But as she spoke, Judge Sterling grew visibly agitated. He kept shifting in his high-backed leather chair, his face reddening. "Miss Allen," Sterling interrupted loudly, completely cutting her off. "Keycard logs can be forged. Coworkers can be persuaded to lie for a friend. The fact remains that the stolen vehicle was found less than 100 yards from the defendant's residence. Destiny stood her ground. Your Honor, proximity is not evidence of possession. The prosecution has presented zero physical evidence tying my client to the vehicle. Harland, the prosecutor, sensed the judge's impatience and stepped in for cross-examination. He hammered Brandon, trying to trip him up, asking rapid-fire questions about his finances, his mother's medical bills, trying to paint a picture of a desperate man willing to commit violence for cash. But Brandon remained calm, answering truthfully and respectfully, just as Destiny had coached him. Frustrated by Brandon's unbreakable composure, Judge Sterling finally snapped. He leaned so far over the bench he looked like a gargoyle about to strike. "Mr. Harland, step back," Sterling commanded. The prosecutor quickly retreated to his table. Sterling turned his furious gaze entirely onto Brandon. The courtroom fell dead silent. The tension was so thick it was suffocating. "You think you're very clever, don't you, boy?" Sterling hissed, his microphone amplifying the venom in his voice. He had entirely abandoned the facade of a neutral arbiter. "You sit there in your cheap suit, spinning fairy tales about alibis. Let me tell you how this works. I look at you, and I know exactly what you are. You are a parasite. People from your specific demographic come into my city, think you can prey on hardworking, successful citizens, think you can steal a luxury vehicle, traumatize a man, and then hide behind some fancy legal footwork." Destiny stepped forward. "Objection, Your Honor, this is highly inappropriate and prejudicial. Sit down and shut your mouth, Miss Allen, or I will have you arrested right now." Sterling roared, his gavel smashing down with frightening violence. He turned back to Brandon, his face twisted in a mask of pure, ugly hatred. "I am going to make an example out of you, Mr. Diaz," Sterling continued, his voice dropping to a menacing, guttural register. The court reporter's fingers flew across her machine, capturing every vile word. "You are going to be found guilty. And when you are, I am going to give you the absolute maximum sentence allowed by the state of Georgia. I will lock you in a cage where animals like you belong, and I will throw away the key. Do you have anything to say for yourself before I hold you in contempt and end this charade right now?" The courtroom was paralyzed. The jury looked horrified. Even Harland looked uncomfortable, realizing the judge had just handed the defense an automatic mistrial on appeal, but Destiny didn't want a mistrial. She wanted a slaughter. She looked at Brandon. Now, Brandon did not flinch, he did not look down. He leaned forward into the microphone, his dark eyes locking onto the pale, enraged eyes of Judge Arthur Sterling. The fear that had gripped him for months vanished, replaced by a cold, righteous fire. "I am not an animal, Your Honor," Brandon said, his voice calm, resonant, and echoing off the wood-paneled walls. "And I didn't steal that car. But since you are so eager to find the parasite who did, I have just one thing to say." Sterling sneered, adjusting his glasses. "Enlighten the court, Mr. Diaz." "It's about the Mercedes-Benz, Judge," Brandon said smoothly. "The police told you the dashcam was destroyed. And they were right, the physical unit was ripped out. But what the police and the thief didn't know is that the S-Class has a failsafe. The internal cabin camera automatically uploaded a high-definition, infrared video of the theft to a secure cloud server in Germany the moment the window was smashed." Sterling's sneer faltered for a fraction of a second. A muscle in his jaw twitched. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, though his voice lacked its previous thunder. Brandon didn't blink. "My attorney subpoenaed the corporate servers, Your Honor. We have the footage. It shows the thief's face in perfect detail, it shows him laughing as he drives the stolen car. And I wasn't the one driving." Sterling's face began to drain of color, turning a sickly, ashen gray. He gripped the edge of the bench, his knuckles turning white. This is a fabrication. This evidence was not introduced in discovery. It is inadmissible. It's entirely admissible as rebuttal evidence to your direct accusations, Your Honor," Destiny interjected, her voice slicing through the air like a scalpel. She picked up a flash drive from her table and held it up. "We have the footage right here." We are prepared to play it for the jury right now. I will not allow this court to be mocked by desperate lies." Sterling shouted, his voice cracking with sudden, raw panic. "I am striking this entire testimony from the record. The jury will disregard—" "I don't think you want to strike it, Judge," Brandon interrupted, his voice rising, commanding the room. He pointed a finger directly at Sterling. "Because the man in that video, the man driving the stolen car, high out of his mind and waving a gun, is wearing your college signet ring." A collective gasp sucked the air out of the courtroom. The jury box erupted into shocked whispers. Brandon didn't stop, he pressed the advantage, driving the stake directly through the heart of Sterling's corruption. "He has your eyes, Judge. He has your nose. And he has your last name. The man who committed the armed robbery wasn't me. It was your son, Trenton Sterling." The court went absolutely, terrifyingly silent. It was a silence so profound you could hear the hum of the air conditioning vents. You could hear the rain lashing against the high windows. The court reporter's hands froze over her keyboard. The bailiffs stood perfectly still, their hands instinctively dropping toward their duty belts. Judge Sterling sat frozen, his mouth slightly open, his eyes wide with a terror so absolute it was almost pathetic. The imperious, untouchable dictator of courtroom 3B had completely evaporated, leaving behind a terrified old man desperately trying to calculate a way out of an inescapable trap. He looked at Destiny, who was staring back at him with an expression of cold, merciless triumph. He looked at Harland, the prosecutor, whose jaw had practically dropped to the floor as he realized he had been used to frame an innocent man to protect the judge's criminal son. "You." Sterling choked out, his voice a pathetic wheeze. "You are lying." "Let's play the tape, Your Honor," Destiny said loudly, stepping toward the audio-visual cart. "Let the jury decide if I'm lying. Let's see Trenton Sterling's face on that screen." "No," Sterling screamed, half standing up from his chair, his hands raised as if physically trying to stop the words from hanging in the air. "Bailiff, confiscate that drive. I am ordering this courtroom cleared. This is a mistrial. This is a mistrial." But the bailiff didn't move. He looked at the judge, then at Destiny, clearly unwilling to involve himself in the destruction of evidence in a room full of witnesses. Destiny turned to the prosecutor. "Mr. Harland. As an officer of the court, you are obligated to review this exculpatory evidence. If you refuse, I will have you reported to the state bar for suborning perjury and malicious prosecution." Harland, realizing his own career was hanging by a thread, rushed forward and took the flash drive from Destiny's hand. He plugged it into his laptop. The courtroom waited in agonizing suspense as Harland clicked on the file. The video filled Harland's screen. The clear, undeniable face of Trenton Sterling, illuminated by the dashboard lights, laughing maniacally as he revved the stolen engine, the heavy gold signet ring glinting on his finger. Harland slowly closed the laptop. He turned to look at Judge Sterling. There was no respect left in his eyes, only disgust. "Your Honor," Harland said, his voice trembling but loud enough for the room to hear. "The state of Georgia immediately drops all charges against Brandon Diaz. And I will be contacting the district attorney's public corruption unit immediately." The courtroom exploded. Reporters scrambled over the wooden benches, pulling out their phones, frantically typing and dialing. The gallery erupted into cheers, shouting, and demands for the judge's immediate arrest. The jury members looked at each other in absolute shock, some of them glaring with open hostility at the man sitting on the bench. Judge Sterling collapsed back into his leather chair, his face buried in his hands. He was hyperventilating, his shoulders shaking. The illusion of his power had been shattered into a million irreparable pieces in less than 5 minutes. He wasn't a guardian of the law, he was a common criminal, exposed in his own arena, utterly destroyed by the very demographic he had sworn to bury. Destiny walked over to the witness stand. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply reached out her hand. Brandon took it, and she helped him step down from the box. "Unlock him," Destiny commanded the bailiff, pointing to Brandon's handcuffs. The bailiff, moving with a newfound reverence, quickly produced his keys and unhooked the heavy iron chains. They hit the wooden floor with a heavy, satisfying clatter. Brandon rubbed his bruised wrists, looking around the chaotic room. He had walked in as a condemned man. He was walking out as a free one. "Let's go," Destiny said, placing a protective hand on his back. As they walked down the center aisle, the crowd parted for them. People clapped Brandon on the shoulder, strangers offered words of support. They pushed through the heavy double doors and out into the hallway, leaving the disgraced judge alone in his ruined courtroom. The immediate aftermath was a media hurricane. By the time Destiny and Brandon reached the front steps of the Fulton County Courthouse, news vans were already pulling up onto the curb. The story of a racist judge using his power to frame an innocent black man to protect his wealthy, criminal son was absolute dynamite. Destiny stood before a battery of microphones, Brandon by her side, and methodically laid out the facts of the case to the public. Behind the scenes, the legal system moved with terrifying speed when forced into the spotlight. Within 2 hours, investigators from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, GBI, swarmed the courthouse. They seized Judge Sterling's computers, his personal files, and his private communications. That evening, as Brandon sat in his mother's small living room, eating a home-cooked meal for the first time in months, he watched the evening news. The headline flashed in bold, red letters across the bottom of the screen. Superior Court Judge Arrested in Courtroom Shocker. The footage showed Arthur Sterling, stripped of his black robes, wearing a rumpled suit, his hands cuffed behind his back, being led out of the courthouse by federal agents. The man who had sneered at Brandon, who had promised to bury him under the prison, looked small, frail, and utterly terrified as the camera flashes blinded him. "He got what he deserved," his mother whispered, placing a hand over Brandon's. "It's just the beginning," Brandon replied, taking a deep breath of free air. Destiny said the feds are looking into every single case he ever presided over. He was right. The revelation of the cloud footage was the string that unraveled Sterling's entire life. The fall of Arthur Sterling was spectacular, brutal, and swift. The Georgia Judicial Qualifications Commission immediately suspended him without pay, pending an investigation. But they barely had time to organize a hearing before the Federal Bureau of Investigation took over the case. Once the FBI dug into Sterling's finances, they found a hornet's nest of corruption. It wasn't just his son. For over a decade, Judge Sterling had been quietly receiving massive kickbacks from a network of private prison contractors. He had systematically handed down maximum sentences to minority defendants for minor, non-violent offenses, ensuring a steady stream of bodies to fill the beds of the private facilities, generating millions in profit for the contractors and hundreds of thousands in offshore accounts for himself. Trenton Sterling was arrested 3 days later at a luxury rehab facility in Malibu, California. The GBI matched his DNA to the steering wheel of the stolen Mercedes, and the cloud footage was undeniable. He was charged with armed robbery, grand theft auto, assault with a deadly weapon, and possession of narcotics. Without his father's corrupt umbrella to shield him, Trenton collapsed under the pressure and immediately took a plea deal, turning state's evidence against his own father in exchange for a reduced sentence. 6 months later, Arthur Sterling stood in a federal courtroom. He was no longer the judge, he was the defendant. He wore the standard-issue orange jumpsuit of a federal inmate. His silver hair had thinned, his arrogant posture was gone, replaced by a permanent, defeated slouch. Destiny and Brandon sat in the back row of the gallery, watching the proceedings. The federal judge, a stern woman with a reputation for absolute integrity, looked down at Sterling with profound disgust. "Arthur Sterling," the judge said, her voice ringing out clearly. "You were entrusted with the most sacred duty in our society, the administration of impartial justice. Instead, you weaponized your prejudice and your power. You destroyed lives, tore apart families, and attempted to frame an innocent young man to protect your own criminal offspring. You are a disgrace to the robe you wore, and a danger to the public." Sterling kept his eyes glued to the floor, his hands trembling. "I sentence you to 25 years in federal prison, without the possibility of early parole," the judge declared, striking her gavel. "You will serve this sentence at the United States Penitentiary, Atlanta." Hard karma had arrived. Sterling was going to the exact same maximum security prison he had threatened to send Brandon to. He would be locked in a cage, surrounded by men he had unjustly sent there. It was a poetic, terrifying justice. As the bailiffs led Sterling away, he chanced a glance backward. His eyes met Brandon's across the crowded room. Brandon didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He simply stared back, his expression calm, strong, and completely unbroken. Sterling quickly looked away, his spirit entirely crushed, and vanished through the heavy wooden doors into the holding cells. Outside the courthouse, the sun was shining brightly over Atlanta. Destiny turned to Brandon, offering him a warm, genuine smile. "So," Destiny said, adjusting her briefcase. "The civil suit against the city and the police department for wrongful arrest and malicious prosecution was finalized this morning. The settlement is in the multi-millions, Brandon. You don't have to work nights at the Congress Center anymore. Your mother's medical bills are paid for life." Brandon looked up at the sky, a profound sense of relief washing over him. The nightmare was finally over. He had walked into the jaws of a corrupt system and, with the help of a brilliant lawyer, had torn it apart from the inside out. "I think I'm going to finally enroll in those architecture classes," Brandon said, a smile breaking across his face. "Build something real." "You already did," Destiny said, patting his arm. "You built a case that brought down a tyrant. Take care of yourself, Brandon." "You too, Destiny. Thank you for everything." As Brandon walked away, stepping out into the bright, busy streets of the city, he felt lighter than he had in years. He had faced down the darkest corner of the justice system, and the truth had set him free. And somewhere, deep in the concrete bowels of the federal penitentiary, a corrupt man was just beginning to realize the true weight of the gavel. What an unbelievable twist of fate. Judge Sterling thought he was untouchable, hiding behind his gavel and his prejudice, but the truth always finds its way into the light. Brandon Diaz's courage to stand up against a corrupt system proves that no one is above the law, not even the people who write it. If this intense story of justice, courtroom drama, and ultimate karma kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Share this video with your friends and family who love a good legal thriller, and watching corrupt bullies get exactly what they deserve.